You have no idea who you're really married to." Those words echoed in Jack Miller's mind as he stood silently at the doorway, his heart pounding with a mix of shock and quiet rage. For 23 years, he had been the steady, dependable husband, working long hours as a financial consultant, always in the background, supporting his wife, Emily, as she rose through the ranks of the corporate world. Their life seemed perfect. A beautiful home in the suburbs, a successful career, and a picture-perfect marriage. But tonight, everything changed. He had just come home from yet another long day at work, the smell of diesel and paperwork still lingering on his clothes. He was tired, exhausted, just looking for a quiet evening. But when he opened the door to their living room, everything he thought he knew about his marriage came crashing down. Emily, with her perfectly styled hair and her glamorous smile, was sitting on the couch surrounded by her friends. The room was filled with laughter, but not the kind that made Jack feel warm. No, this was the kind of laughter that cut straight through him, the kind that made him feel invisible. And then it happened. Emily, with no hesitation, said the words that pierced through him like a dagger. "Honestly, this marriage has a year left. Max." She laughed, and the others joined in, her friends snickering, as if it were all a joke. But Jack wasn't laughing. He stood frozen, feeling like he'd been slapped across the face. He wanted to yell, to throw something, to demand answers. But instead, he took a breath, a long, controlled breath. He walked in slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of the room. They stopped laughing when they saw him, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. He wasn't the man they thought he was. Jack wasn't the quiet, submissive husband anymore. He wasn't the man they'd laughed at, the one they'd dismissed. He was something else, something much more dangerous. "Then let's not waste a year," Jack said, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife. "It ends tonight." The room went silent. Emily's face turned pale as she realized Jack wasn't reacting the way she expected. He wasn't angry, he wasn't screaming. He was calm. And in that moment, Jack knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to stand there and be humiliated anymore. He wasn't going to let Emily or anyone else belittle him again. Jack had his secrets, and he wasn't afraid to reveal them. The man she thought was beneath her was actually the one with the power. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Emily speechless in her own home. She had no idea that the company she was signing an $800 million deal with was Jack's. The same man she had just humiliated was the one pulling the strings behind it all. The real game was just about to begin. Jack left the house in silence, his mind racing with the words that had just been spoken. It ends tonight. He wasn't sure how it was going to end, but one thing was clear. This was no longer about a marriage, or Emily, or her career. This was about Jack taking back control. He went to his office, the place he'd kept his business dealings hidden for years, a space that Emily never dared to enter. He sat at his desk and opened the drawer where he kept the documents that proved he was more than just the man Emily thought she knew. The company he had founded, the one Emily had no idea he owned, had signed an $800 million deal with one of the largest corporations in the world. He had built this empire from the ground up, brick by brick, while she was busy climbing the corporate ladder. As the night went on, Jack's mind was focused, his every move calculated. Emily thought she could humiliate him, laugh at him in front of her friends, and still walk away with everything. But what she didn't know was that the power she had taken for granted was about to slip through her fingers. The next day, as Emily left for another business trip, Jack made a few calls. His lawyer, his accountant, and a few trusted contacts all knew what was coming. They all knew that today wasn't going to be a normal day. Jack wasn't the man he once was, the man who took insults and humiliation in silence. He had a plan now. He wasn't going to let Emily get away with this. Emily came home later that evening, her eyes still filled with the fake confidence she had when she walked out the door that morning. But there was something different in the air. Jack was sitting in the living room, waiting for her, and his calm demeanor sent a chill through her spine. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jack didn't respond immediately. He simply reached into the drawer and pulled out the contract, the same one she had signed the day before. "I hope you enjoy your deal," he said, his voice steady and cold. Emily's face went pale as she realized what was happening. She had no idea that Jack was the one behind the deal, the one who had made the final decision, the one who owned the company. She had thought he was just the guy she married, the one who couldn't even make a proper living. But Jack wasn't the same man she had married. He had hidden his power, his wealth, his influence for years, all while she had taken him for granted. And now, it was time for her to face the consequences of underestimating him. The silence in the room was deafening. Jack stood up, walked toward her, and handed her the contract. "You didn't think it would be this easy, did you?" he asked, his voice like ice. Emily didn't say a word. She couldn't. She was speechless, realizing that the man she had belittled, the one she had called a fool, was the very man who held her future in his hands. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the contract in Jack's hands. She had always believed she was the one with the power in their marriage. Her career had skyrocketed while Jack had quietly supported her, always in the background, never drawing attention to himself. But now, standing in front of her, he wasn't the quiet man she thought she knew. His silence was deafening, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, a gaze that she had never truly understood. "How long did you think you could keep this from me?" Jack asked, his voice steady, with an undercurrent of something more. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had never imagined that the man she had belittled for years, the one she thought was beneath her, would turn out to be the one holding the reins of her future. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and her throat tightened as reality set in. Jack wasn't just a passive observer in her life. He had been the one orchestrating everything from the shadows. She tried to piece together the fragments of her past, the little moments when something fell off, but she had dismissed them. The missing pieces of the puzzle finally came together, and she saw him, Jack, standing before her as the mastermind, the one who had never revealed his true self. "I built everything you have, Emily," Jack continued, his voice cold. "I made the deals, I signed the contracts. Everything you've worked for, every deal you've closed, I'm the one who made it happen." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. The life she thought she had, the success she thought she earned, it was all built on a foundation she never understood. She had walked through life thinking she was the one in control, but Jack had always been the one pulling the strings. She had used him, mocked him, and taken him for granted, never once questioning his quiet demeanor, never once seeing the quiet strength beneath. Jack wasn't the weak man she had made him out to be. He was the one who had built everything from the ground up. "You wanted power, Emily," Jack said, his voice low and firm. "You wanted to be the one in charge. But you never stopped to ask who was really in charge all along." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never imagined that it would end like this. That Jack, the man she had mocked, was the one who would have the final say. Jack wasn't the fool she thought he was. He was the man who held her future in his hands. And now, the tables had turned. The man she had humiliated in front of her friends and colleagues had finally revealed his true power. And there was nothing she could do to undo the damage. Jack's calm demeanor never wavered as he stood in front of her, waiting for her to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Emily was speechless, her mind racing as she tried to process the reality she had just been forced to face. It wasn't just the deal, it wasn't just the company. It was everything. Jack had been in control all along, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. Emily stood there, her mind spinning as the full weight of Jack's revelation settled in. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, thinking she was the one in control, but now she saw the truth. The success she had achieved, the deals she had closed, everything she had worked for, had been built on a foundation she had no idea was there. Jack, the quiet, unassuming man she had dismissed for years, was the one pulling the strings. He had watched, waited, and when the time was right, he had revealed his hand. Emily's pride began to crumble as she realized she had misjudged him. All those years of mocking him, belittling his contributions, and now it was clear, he had been the one making the real decisions all along. "You never understood me, Emily," Jack said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something sharper beneath the surface. "You always thought you were the one in charge, that you could walk all over me, but you were never the one holding the cards." Emily wanted to speak, to explain herself, but she couldn't. The words stuck in her throat. How could she defend herself when she had been so wrong about him? Jack wasn't just some background figure in her life. He was the architect of everything they had. The house, the lifestyle, the company. He had built it all, while she had been too focused on her own rise to see it. And now, everything was slipping through her fingers. She tried to play it cool, but inside, She was panicking. She had built her entire career on the idea that she was powerful, that she was the one who made things happen. But Jack had been the real power all along. "I don't want to fight with you, Jack," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" Jack repeated, his tone cold. "You never once stopped to think about what I was doing, what I was sacrificing for us. You never thought to ask how I felt, how I was contributing. You just took, and I let you." Emily could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always assumed Jack would be there, quietly supporting her, never asking for anything in return. But now she saw that he had been silently watching, waiting for the right moment to show her that he was not someone to be underestimated. As the silence stretched between them, Jack walked over to his desk, pulling out a set of documents. He handed them to Emily, and she looked at them in shock. They were legal papers, outlining the full extent of his holdings in the company, the properties, the assets, everything. "This is what you've been taking for granted, Emily," Jack said quietly. "This is everything I've built, and you can't take it from me." Emily looked down at the papers, her hands shaking. She had no idea how deep Jack's involvement went, how much power he truly held. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been playing a game she didn't understand, and now she was losing. Jack wasn't just a passive observer in their marriage. He was the one who had been controlling everything from behind the scenes. And now that he had revealed the truth, there was no going back. Emily stood frozen, the weight of Jack's words settling in her chest like a stone. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The papers in her hands felt heavier with each passing second, like they were pulling her into the abyss of realization. She had spent so many years believing she was in control, that her success, her power, were all hers alone. But the truth was clear now. Jack had been the one behind everything. She had underestimated him, dismissed him as just the supportive husband in the background. But now, standing before her, was the man who had been quietly shaping their world, making decisions she never even knew about. The company, the wealth, the contracts, all of it had been built by him. And now, it was slipping from her grasp. She tried to steady herself, but her mind was racing. How had she not seen this? How had she been so blind to everything he had been doing? Jack had never asked for recognition. He had never demanded the spotlight. But he had never been invisible either. He had been right there, in the shadows, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. And now that moment had come. "What do you want, Jack?" Emily finally found her voice, but it trembled. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel the ground beneath her feet starting to shift. Jack's expression remained unreadable. "I want respect," he said quietly. "For all the years you've ignored me, belittled me, used me, I want you to understand that I am not your fool. I am the one who made everything possible for you, and I want you to see me for who I truly am." His words stung more than she expected. He wasn't asking for anything extravagant. He wasn't asking for her love or her admiration. He was simply asking for the one thing she had denied him for so long: respect. And in that moment, Emily realized just how much she had taken him for granted. She had built a career, a life, a reputation on the back of his silent sacrifice. She had climbed the ladder, and in the process, she had stepped on the very man who had been holding it steady for her. Jack wasn't just her husband. He was the foundation of everything she had. And now, as she stood there holding the papers in her hands, she felt the foundation crack beneath her. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack shook his head slowly. "You didn't have to mean it, Emily. The damage is done." His eyes softened for a moment, but the anger and betrayal still simmered just beneath the surface. "I never asked you for anything, but you always took. And now, everything you thought was yours is slipping away." Emily looked down at the contract again, the reality of the situation sinking in deeper. She had built her empire, but Jack had built it first. And now, she was nothing more than a passenger on a journey she thought she was driving. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear and uncertainty. Jack didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. The same skyline they had both dreamed of conquering together. But now, it felt like a distant memory. "What happens now is up to you, Emily," Jack said finally, his back still to her. "You can choose to walk away from all of this and leave it behind, or you can stay and try to rebuild what's broken. But understand this, I'm no longer the man who just stands in the background. He turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. I have my own future now, and it doesn't include you in the way you think it does. Emily's heart sank. She had no idea what her next step would be, but one thing was clear. The man she had thought she knew, the man she had tried to control, was no longer the same person. Jack had changed, and now, it was time for her to face the consequences of that change. Emily sat in silence, the weight of Jack's words hanging heavily in the air between them. She had never imagined her life would come to this moment. Her career, her success, everything she had worked for, suddenly felt like it was crumbling in her hands. She had spent years building her reputation, thinking she was the one in control, but Jack had always been the true architect. The realization hit harder with each passing second. She had believed that her drive, her ambition, had defined their life together, but now she saw the truth. Jack was the one who had laid the foundation for everything. The life she had assumed was all hers to command was built on his quiet labor and sacrifice. As she sat there, the room felt colder, emptier, and she felt the full sting of the years she had spent pushing Jack aside, taking his support for granted. But Jack wasn't the man she thought he was. The calm, composed man who had always quietly supported her was the same man who had built their wealth, their empire, the life they had. He had been right there, in the shadows, while she basked in the spotlight. Now, he was showing her exactly who he had become. I don't know what to say, Jack, Emily whispered, her voice shaking. You never gave me a chance to see what you were capable of. Jack's gaze was steady, unblinking. You never bothered to look, Emily. You were too busy chasing your own success to notice mine. His words cut deep, not because of their harshness, but because of the truth they carried. Emily had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that she had never once considered what Jack was building beneath her. And now, she realized just how much she had lost in the process. Jack wasn't angry anymore. The rage had subsided, replaced by a cold clarity. He wasn't looking for validation. He wasn't asking for her forgiveness. He had already moved on from the person he had been when they started this journey together. What do you want from me now? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, and for a moment, he seemed distant, as if he was looking past her, past the life they had shared. Nothing, he said finally, his voice calm. You've already taken everything I had to give. But now it's my turn. Emily blinked, trying to process his words. What does that mean? Jack pushed himself off the wall and walked toward the window. It means I'm done being the supporting character in your story, Emily. I'm done being the man behind the curtain. It's time for me to take the lead. His words hung in the air, a declaration of independence that Emily had never imagined coming from him. The man who had always been content with the shadows was stepping into the light. Jack had made his decision, and now it was her turn to face the consequences of her actions. She had spent so many years thinking she was the one in control, but now she saw how little she truly understood. She had built her career on the backs of others, but now she was alone. Jack had found his power, and she was left wondering where she stood. Jack didn't need her validation anymore. He had his own future, and it was far beyond the life they had shared. Emily was left to pick up the pieces, realizing that the life she had built was not her own. It had been Jack's all along. The next few days felt like a blur for Emily. The shock of Jack's revelation had left her reeling, but the weight of it all began to settle in. She found herself at the office, surrounded by success, but she couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to Jack, to the life they had built together, and to the truth he had laid bare. She had spent years climbing the ladder, but now she understood the cost of her ambitions. She had never thought to ask how Jack felt, never stopped to consider the sacrifices he had made for her. And now, he was no longer the man she could control. He had taken control of his own life, and she was left to pick up the pieces. The next time they spoke, Emily tried to apologize, but Jack wasn't interested in hearing it. He had already made his decision. He had moved on, and he wasn't looking back. I don't need your apology, Emily, Jack had said, his voice as steady as ever. What's done is done. I've already moved forward. You need to do the same. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the phone in her hand. She had tried to call Jack several times, but he never answered. She had sent him countless messages, but he had ignored every one. It was clear he wasn't interested in reopening the past. Emily knew she had to face the reality that Jack wasn't coming back. The life she had once known was gone, and she had no idea what her future looked like. She had built her career on her own terms, but now she was realizing that the true cost of success wasn't just the long hours and hard work. It was the people she had left behind along the way. Jack had been right all along. She had taken him for granted, thinking that he would always be there to support her. But now, he was out of her reach, moving on to something better. And as the days passed, Emily began to feel the weight of her choices. She had spent so much time focusing on her own rise to the top that she had neglected the one person who had always been there for her. And now, that person was gone. Jack had made it clear that he was done, and Emily realized there was no going back. The world she had known, the world she had built, was no longer hers. It was Jack's, and she had lost it all. Emily stood in front of her office window, looking out at the city skyline. The same skyline she had once dreamed of conquering. The same skyline that now felt distant and unreachable. She had been so focused on her own success that she had failed to see the true cost of it all. Jack had built the empire they lived in, and now it was gone. The realization hit her hard, but she knew there was no one to blame but herself. The life she had once known, the life she had thought was hers, had been built on a lie. And now, the truth had come to light, and there was no turning back. Weeks passed, and Emily found herself stuck in a routine that no longer felt like hers. She continued to go through the motions of her successful career, but it all felt empty. The high-powered meetings, the constant travel, the deals being signed, none of it held the same appeal anymore. The excitement that had once driven her to reach the top had faded, replaced by a deep sense of regret. Jack's absence lingered like a shadow over her every move. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about everything he had done for her, everything she had taken for granted. He had always been there, quietly in the background, never asking for anything in return, while she had been focused on her own success. Now, he was gone, and all that remained was the hollow feeling of what she had lost. Emily knew she had made mistakes, but she wasn't sure how to make it right. She had reached out to Jack multiple times, but his responses were short, distant. He had made it clear that he was done with their past, that he had moved on. Every message she sent, every call she made, seemed to only push him further away. She began to wonder if she had truly lost him for good. One evening, as Emily sat alone in her apartment, she found herself staring at the city skyline. The same skyline she and Jack had once dreamed of conquering together. It seemed so distant now, a reminder of a future that could have been. She had spent so many years focusing on her own goals, never realizing that Jack was building something far greater than anything she had ever imagined. He had been the force behind everything they had, and now, he was living a life without her. Emily had always prided herself on being in control, but now, she realized just how little control she had truly had. Jack had built the life they had, and she had taken it for granted. She had mocked him, belittled him, and now, all that was left was the painful knowledge of what she had lost. Emily took a deep breath, the weight of it all pressing down on her. She couldn't change the past, but she could try to move forward. She had made mistakes, and now it was time to face the consequences. It wasn't just about her career or her success. It was about the person she had become. Jack had shown her a side of herself she hadn't wanted to see, but it was a side that needed to be faced. She could no longer hide behind her career or her ambitions. She had to confront the truth of who she was and what she had done. For the first time in a long time, Emily realized that she wasn't just lost without Jack. She was lost because she had never truly known who she was without him. The realization hit her like a wave, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her actions. She had spent so long building a life that didn't include him, but now, she could see that the life she had built was never really hers at all. It had always been Jack's, and now, she had to live with that truth. Emily woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. The world outside seemed so far away, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. She had spent the last few days reflecting, trying to understand where she had gone wrong, how she had lost the one person who had always been there for her. She had never truly appreciated Jack, and now, she saw the consequences of her actions. The career she had built, the success she had strived for, all felt meaningless without him. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman who had once been so certain of her place in the world now seemed like a stranger. She had spent years defining herself by her achievements, but in the end, those achievements had come at a cost. Jack had been the foundation of everything, and she had never once considered what he needed, what he wanted. Emily couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. She had to face the truth, even if it was painful. She had been selfish, consumed by her own ambition, and now she had lost everything that truly mattered. She needed to make things right, but she wasn't sure how. The phone on the table buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up and saw Jack's name on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat, but she hesitated. It had been days since they last spoke, and she knew that this conversation would be different. She took a deep breath before answering. "Jack?" she said, her voice trembling. There was a pause on the other end, and then Jack's voice came through, calm and steady. "I've been thinking," he said, "and I've decided that it's time for me to move forward. I'm done looking back." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had hoped for a different answer, but she knew deep down that this was the truth. Jack had made his decision. He had moved on, and there was no going back. "I understand," she whispered. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, Emily wondered if Jack had hung up. But then he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You don't need to apologize, Emily. I think you're finally seeing the truth. And that's all I ever wanted." Emily closed her eyes, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. She had lost Jack, but in that moment, she realized that she had also gained something: clarity. She knew what she needed to do, who she needed to become. She could no longer hide behind her career or her past mistakes. She had to rebuild her life, not based on success or ambition, but on the values that truly mattered. As she sat there, the rain still falling softly outside, Emily made a promise to herself. She would not repeat the mistakes of the past. She would take the lessons she had learned and use them to become a better person, a better partner, and someone who could finally live with the truth. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was done being the person she once was.